Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the finale of the Matrix trilogy reviews. The best movie in the series by far, The Matrix Revolutions, the film that was a masterpiece. It was the greatest thing ever. It was flawless. There has never been any problem with it, and nobody complains about it for the whole time it's been released. It has been the last 15 years. Reloaded was a bit divisive with people. Some people were appreciative of certain decisions that the story took. A lot of people otherwise were a little mixed on it. But overall, that was the reception. It was fine, decent, but not quite as good, not even close to the first Matrix movie. So obviously the idea of a final film, the one that would bring everything together, got people excited because this is the one that would make things right, it would make things perfect, and it would be able to give a great ending to the series. Yeah, it didn't do that at all. This film is not terrible, okay? It's not awful. It's not one of the worst movies ever made or anything. It's just disappointing. The problem with this film is it's brimming with ambition and like this sense of potential, and it's so like well crafted in terms of its ideas that are sprinkled throughout that the execution kills it. And that is one of the biggest disappointments for this movie because you can tell at points they really have a very interesting systematic ending planned out for all of this, comparing it to the first film in terms of the ideas that movie explored. However, when you get to the end of this film, you kind of end up with a pretty botchy film. A film that's not, like I said, not terrible. It's eh. It's just pretty eh. And it's definitely a far cry from anything that the first Matrix movie was, and even further away from what Reloaded was. So, what went wrong here? Before we get into what went wrong, let's start with the first few minutes of the film. Let's talk about Neo. At the end of Reloaded, he realizes he could stop Sentinels in the real world. He collapses, he's non-responsive, and he wakes up in a station. There's a girl at the station too named Sati, and the station is called Mobile Avenue, which, if you guys know anagrams, is Limbo Avenue. And so the Oracle realizes, who by the way is played by a different actress in this movie because the other actress passed away during the two movies being shot, may she rest in peace. When Trinity and Morpheus are called in to the Oracle, she says that the Merovingian has details on where Neo can be. So they go over to his place. There's a shootout scene that happens, which is pretty cool. There's a button scratched out in the corner that says HEL instead of HELP because the P is scratched out. And when they enter, they see the Merovingian, and he says this line.
We only want to talk.
Oh, yes. I'm sure you do. You have fought through hell to do so.
So Neo is in limbo. He just said hell. He's dressed up like the devil. And they're here to take Neo home, which is essentially heaven, if you would call Zion that at this point in time. So that was one of the biggest issues with this film, is that it suddenly becomes a film where it's the Wachowskis preaching down to you. There are certain ideas and concepts that they bring up, and they kind of shove it in your face. Now, subtlety is a great use. It's a great tool that can be used to really tell certain things. Like, you could use it in a way that's like, okay, it's trying to show this. It's not, like forcing it, but you can tell it's a parallel towards this. Instead, the Wachowskis kind of considered that you wouldn't get it, but in reality, we were getting it. And it just felt like it was being, like I said, shoved down your throat quite a bit. But the other thing that bothers me about Revolutions, aside from this, is the fact that this is just not a very well-made movie. It's very clunkily made. The direction is also very aimless at points and very scattered. There are points where you can tell that this is the film that the Wachowskis wanted to make for, like, this is it. This is the film they wanted to make. But then there are points where you're thinking that they're making this as a filler sequence because they're really just building up to the part which they really want to show you, the part which is what you really came to the theater for. And that can be a bit frustrating at times. Another thing I mentioned in my review for Matrix Reloaded is that the dialogue was significantly weaker compared to the first movie. Here it takes a bloody nosedive. I swear to God, some of this dialogue is terrible. They also choose to focus a lot on side characters in this movie, which is something I wasn't a fan of. You spend a lot of time with characters, some of them who you don't care about at all, like the few commanders in the Zion, military force, who are terrible characters, especially Commander Locke, who I hate. I thought he was a terrible character in Reloaded. I think he's the worst character in this movie. I think he's a complete waste of time. There's this kid who's always obsessing over Neo, who gets a bunch of really, really bad lines, some very cheesy lines, which I don't quite understand. And when you finally get to the final battle of Zion, a lot of it is made redundant because you don't quite care for a lot of characters caught in the middle of it. Sure, Morpheus and Niobe and Link was a character I really liked in Reloaded as well, are in this, and it's fun, but aside from that, like, overall, it's just like, okay, I see, this is like, you're making this because you have to, but really, you want to make this for Neo's journey. Neo, in this movie, also doesn't really do much until much, much later in the movie. His arc in this film is that he gets out, he figures out that the source is where he has to go to really stop this war. On his way to the source, one other agent in the middle of Matrix Reloaded, which is very obscure, named Bane. No, not that one. I wish. He comes back to consciousness and he seems a little weird. And it turns out Agent Smith kind of corrupted him from the inside, and then on the way out through the telephone, he's basically able to enter the real world as a virus in Bane's head. And Bane, of course, tries to take Trinity hostage, and in the process, Neo's eyes get burned off, and suddenly Neo can see everything in the gold code of the Matrix, which is essentially the pure code of sorts. And he kills Bane, and then they realize, alright, now I can see things a lot more differently. So on their way to the source through these fields, there's a attack that happens by Sentinels, and Trinity dies. That whole thing in Reloaded suddenly feels really redundant. I get what they're doing. I get it. It's kind of like a poetic thing in that what happens next. But see, now we're coming to the part where you can see this is what the Wachowskis were really trying to do. And we'll talk about the finale in a bit. But I'm going to revert back now to certain other things about this film that don't quite work for me. Some of the acting, for instance. When I said the directing was a little off this time, it really extends to a few performances that I've been a fan of. I've loved Hugo Weaving in a lot of movies. I really love him. I think he's actually really cool as Megatron in the Transformers movies too. Here what happened is that the first two movies, he was fine. For some reason, in Revolutions, they turned him into this weird cartoon character where he's saying a bunch of really crazy shit. Like this.
Maybe you knew I was going to do that. Maybe you didn't. If you did, that means you baked those cookies and set that plate right there deliberately, purposefully. Which means that you're sitting there also deliberately, purposefully.
What did you do with Santi?
Cookies need love like everything does.
He comes over to the Oracle to assimilate her. He does. And then it leads to one of the most bizarre things in cinematic history, where he does this. Was that warranted? Did that have to happen? Was in the script? Okay, Agent Smith. Hugo, I want you to look at the camera slowly and start going. Can you do that, Hugo? I don't know why you're asking me to do that, but I will if necessary. That's great, Hugo. That's great. All right. So is there anything about Revolutions that I do like? Yes, there are actually elements I do like. As usual, Keanu Reeves, man, he's still doing everything he can in this movie. He still does a pretty good job in this, and that is to be commended. The visual effects, for the most part, are still pretty good. They're a bit messy at points, and some of the action sequences still do remain kind of fun. Particularly coming to the ending, which I swear, I'm getting to it. I have a lot to say about that. The cinematography, there's a lot of great shots in this film. It's well shot. It's some of the sequences. There's a few points in the final battle between Neo and Smith which look amazing. The phenomenal score once again by Don Davis. By the way, if you haven't heard it, check out Navras. It's a track online. It's the final track of the soundtrack. Amazing. Now, about that track, Remember when I said there was like all this Christian symbolism and all that? There was also Buddhism in Matrix Reloaded, along with the Christian symbolism. Here they decided to go one step further and add Sanskrit to the whole thing. So Hinduism is part of this now in the soundtrack. And the poem, which is being recited in the song, the translation for that, I'm just going to put it right here in this slide. You can pause it if you want to and read it. And basically that's adding another layer to it, which if you're somebody who's from India, you're reading that and thinking, yeah, that's even more on the nose, you know, because we learned this in like 5th grade, maybe even earlier than that for some people. I don't know. Yeah. So let's talk about the finale. This is where I think the Wachowskis went from wanting to kind of direct some stuff to fill out the runtime to this is the movie we wanted to make. Neo finally enters through the Source. He realizes that this is the only way to do it. He's lost everything, and this is essentially his final sacrifice moment. Neo and Smith start to fight, and things are not going pretty well for Neo, and he's losing to Smith. At one point in time, however, he realizes that the Smith that he's fighting is essentially the Oracle that he assimilated earlier. And it's also because Neo hears Smith say the line, everything that has a beginning has an end, which is what the Oracle says to him earlier on in the movie. And that kind of clicks in his head. And he realizes that because he's connected to the Source, the only way to kill Smith is by having himself assimilated, so the Source can then hack into the Smith program and basically assimilate all of Smith. And that's exactly what happens in the film. Now, as an idea, that's great. I think that's a great idea. And I think as an ending, I'm gonna be honest, you don't see it really ending anywhere else. You know, Neo had to pretty much die, I think. There was no way he was gonna walk out of this alive. So the idea of having him basically sacrifice himself in this way to save Zion and save everyone, it really seems like the best way to do it. So this part, I don't mind. I don't mind that this is how the entire story finally wraps up. It's everything leading up to this moment, which is where the problems lie for me. It's not all bad. It's just this is the stuff I don't really care about. And it's just, that's what bogs this film down quite a bit. Also ends on a very strange note, in that Sati finally comes and she's like, I made this sunrise for Neo. And she says, will we ever see him again? And the Oracle says, yeah, I suppose so. It's like, wait, you suppose so? So you mean he's gonna come back? Or are you alluding to the fact that there have been the ones in the past, like the Architect was talking about in Reloaded, and so you're gonna see another one again? Is that what you're talking about? Or are you saying that Neo is gonna come back? Or are you just saying that it was because it's like, oh, it's a kid, you don't want to make the kid feel upset? But then you're the Oracle, you're not gonna be like that woman. You're gonna straight up tell her that, oh yeah, he's not coming back. You seem like a very straightforward woman. I'm just saying, you know, maybe you're not. Maybe you're a very nice woman. You just made cookies, but you were being honest while making cookies as well. There are a lot of questions that The Matrix Revolutions is unfortunately not able to answer that were raised from Reloaded. There are certain things that still don't quite make sense. Like, so much of what the Architect talked about still raises so many questions, even now after the film is over. And you can think about it all you want, but unfortunately it still remains a pretty blank slate. That said, the film for me is just disappointing once again, but it is far lower than I thought Reloaded was. It's just, but I don't think it's terrible. I don't think it's terrible at all. I can still watch this movie at points. I just don't love it nearly as much as the first one, or even like it as much as Reloaded. I'm gonna give The Matrix Revolutions a 6 out of 10. Guys, thank you very much for joining me in this series of the Matrix trilogy reviews. I've had a ton of fun talking about them. I hope you guys enjoyed watching it as well. As always, if you like this, please do subscribe, and I'll see you guys at the movies.